Welcome to They Talk Funny. This is episode 63. I know it's following episode 64, but we have a fantastic guest. It is Jim Mendrinos. Jim is one of the professors at the Gotham Writers Workshop, as well as the author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Comedy Writing. Sorry for bringing up this artifact just so early in the conversation. Jim has been doing comedy for 36 years.
37 at this point.
37 years. He started when he was 19, just a pup. He has written for Saturday Night Live with Colin Quinn. He's also has done Tough Crowd. He's been writing for HBO. He's everywhere, as well as Living in Exile, which was his web series. So please welcome to the virtual stage that is They Talk Funny, Mr. Jim Mendrinos.
Why, thank you. I'm just going to enjoy the cheers in my head. It's a long ovation. Wow, you guys, it's amazing. Canadian audiences are very nice.
Well, let's see if anyone who is watching wants to chime in saying that they're not watching from Canada. Please do. But if you are watching from Canada, please chime in as well. Let's get a little maple representation happening. I tried spreading a bad rumor that Vermont maple syrup was 10% corn syrup. And
if it's not, it should be.
What? No, that's not. Never mind.
You want to keep the Canadian syrup more valuable, so let's water down the American stuff.
I suppose we got to get that Canadian dollar up so we can get you back in the country.
It would be nice to come over the border again. Mm-hmm. Although your border people, for whatever reason, do not like me. Your border people. Oh, I've played Canada maybe 20, 30 times in my career, and every time I go across that border, I am detained at the crossing. It doesn't matter if I take a plane. Doesn't matter. I've taken a train to Toronto, and when I got off at customs, they detained me. Just every time, every way I've ever gone up there.
Are you familiar with? I think it's Kathy Ladman's bit about Canadian customs.
No.
I'd have to do kind of an impression because her accent is very key to it.
Okay.
But it's just she goes. I was traveling north of Winnipeg in February, which is kind of like going south of hell in August. And I got stopped by the Canadian customs, and the person asked me, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from the United States." She says, "Why are you here, business or pleasure?" I said, "I'm here for business." She says, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a comedian. But apparently I have an accent." So what she heard was, "I'm a Canadian." So she said, "Well, I thought you said you're from the United States." So I thought that she meant that if I was from the United States, I couldn't be funny enough to be a comedian. So I said, "Will Rogers, a very famous American." And she says, "I don't care who you're related to." What do you think you are, some kind of comedian? She said, "No, I'm from the United States." So sorry.
I love Kathy.
All apologies to Kathy Ladman for that for that impression.
It really is amazing though. But Canadian customs will they are intensely searching your stuff while being polite as anything. Do you mind if we search your bag? Yes, I do. I'm so sorry, but I have to. Then why did you ask?
They sort of recognize that they are PR. Now you started 37 years ago doing comedy at the age of 19, which meant that you weren't legal to go into bars yet. What kind of venues?
I was actually in New York. The drinking age was 18, and they switched it to 19. If you were born before September of 1964, you could go into a bar at 18. If you were born after September, you had to wait till you were 21. I was born in August, and actually August 25th. So I made it by 6 days.
All right, squeaking in there. What was the impetus for you to go up and try stand up comedy?
I was always that crazy kid that loved comedy. Like I would be 6 years old and I'd watch the Dean Martin roast, and the next day go to the schoolyard and do a Foster Brooks impression, and the other kids looking at me like he's weird. But it was always something that old guys did. It wasn't anything that anyone from because think of the Dean Martin roast. It was, it was Foster Brooks. It was Red Buttons. It was, those guys. And then all of a sudden I saw Freddie Prinze, and that changed everything, especially because he talked about my life. He talked about living in a walk-up tenement, and I lived in a walk-up tenement. He talked about having a crazy super, and I had a crazy super. He talked about his dad being an immigrant, and my dad was an immigrant. And it was just like, holy crap, this guy's talking about my life. And I was the biggest Freddie Prinze fanatic anybody has ever seen. I convinced my dad, who was off the boat from Greece. My dad literally was off the boat from Greece. I convinced him to get cable TV in 1976 to pay for television in 1976, which you cannot get an immigrant to do that, so that I could watch, because I had heard that Freddie Prinze was going to have a comedy special live from the Improv. So I convinced my dad to do it, and he did it, and we sat down and watched the special together, and on the special, Elaine Boozler said the word shit. And my dad, the next morning, took the cable out. So it was literally in there. I got to see the special one time.
He didn't say Malacca or anything when he was doing it? No?
No. My dad just sat there stone-faced the entire time, like, let me see what my 12-year-old son is into. And then he saw a woman talking dirty and gone.
Oh. You really should be up in Montreal more often. Do you realize that there is there's 3 school boards in Montreal?
Really?
There's the English Montreal School Board, l'École Scolaire Française, the French School Board, and then there's the Hellenistic School Board. So you can actually send your children to school in Greek in Canada, in Montreal, in the city of Montreal.
Which you don't want to do that. If anybody in Montreal is listening, don't do that to your kids. Your kids are getting beat up enough as it is. You're making it so that when they go to college, they'll be miserable. That's all you're doing. They'll have no social skills.
A lot of the Greek guys tend to be the really tough guys here in Montreal, so that's
because you have no game with women, so you're angry and you fight. It's 14 hours of Greek men yelling at you. Nobody wants that. Don't do it, people.
All right, so Freddie Prinze was a huge influence and inspiration. That's like you had a 7-year gap to get up there. The Dean Martin roasts and such. How did your first set go? Do you remember?
Yeah, so
no one ever forgets.
My 19th birthday, because at 18 I started going to theater, and I studied with a famed acting teacher in New York named Bill Hickey, who for whatever reason thought I had talent, and then he kept telling me, "Wait, don't do stand up, just get your acting chops down." And he was very much of the belief that I was going to be a great actor or a great theater person, so he wanted to dissuade me from what he viewed as basically court jester kind of stuff. And then my sister, Mary, took me to Catch a Rising Star on my 19th birthday. And we sat down and I watched what, in my opinion, was an all-star team. It was Freddie Stoller and Richard Jenny and Carol Siskin was on that show. Larry Amoros was on that show. Dennis Wolfberg was on that show. Ronnie Shakes was on that show. I'm blanking on some of the names, but just murderers on that show. And I'm watching all of them do it, and they're like, well, I could do that. And I sat down, and then it went to late night MC and a comedian who's still working out in LA named Bernadette Luckett takes over for late night MC, and I'm watching her bring up people who are like the next generation, like Gilbert Gottfried, and all the next generation of stars. And then the next week, back then, you would wait out online, so you had to get there at 7 a.m. and you would wait all day, and at 5 a.m. they would give the first 8 people an audition spot, and then you would come back, and after 11 p.m. they would start sprinkling in the auditioners. I got the last number, and there was a lovely young lady from Nashville, Tennessee, and she got the number just before me, and we flirted and laughed and everything for hours, and then we got our numbers, and then we went to eat, and we were drinking heavily as one does at 19, and then I went on stage, and I had understood what comedy was. I knew what I wanted to do, and I had crafted 5 minutes. They told me 5 minutes. I crafted it. I like a script, just precise. And I'm the last one to go up, so I'm on after late night MC. Bernadette sees me and she goes, "Hey, I know you. You're a comic. Can you do me a favor? Just keep going till you see me back in the room." And now I know it was a bathroom break. You know what I mean? But back then, I'm there like, oh, she recognizes talent. You're 19. You're filled with hubris. And I went and I did my 5 minutes, and I got a couple of laughs. You're always happy with a couple of laughs. In retrospect, probably not as many as my ego tells me I got. And then my 5 minutes finish, and I got nothing. I got not a thing, and she's nowhere to be found. So I started asking the audience, what if I did that joke this way? What if I did that? And I'm just reworking those same jokes again. And she comes back in and takes me off, and clearly they didn't pass me first time. I was probably god awful. But I got off stage and I made out with the girl from Nashville and wound up taking a bus with her to Nashville later that night and hanging out in her house for 3 weeks, because at 19 you could do stupid shit like that. Yeah. And it was the best job in the world. I mean, I got laughs, I was drinking heavy, and I got the girl. What's not to like in this scenario?
Your father's thinking you're living the American dream at that point.
Oh, well, at that point my dad just was happy I wasn't in the kitchen, with an entire family where everyone cooked at one restaurant or another. I think he was just happy that I was not working in a restaurant. I could have been a serial killer, and he's there like, at least he's not cooking to people.
But he's still using knives.
Yeah. Well, it's a skill.
It's a skill. Now, normally I ask writers about their discipline, comedians about their writing discipline, about their writing habits. You've got an entire appendix in here about what you do each day, or what you recommend people do each day. I know it's been 16, 17 years since this book has come out, so it has probably evolved since then.
Yeah.
But July 27th is when you talk about organizing your premises.
Yeah, and premise organization, very important, because we don't realize that things can be connected, and you don't realize how easily things can be connected. I had written a bit about the first car that I ever bought, and I had written a bit about my first girlfriend, and then I wrote a bit about the first house that I ever bought. And those seem like three totally separate bits, but you can organize them by being about firsts, and you can give them a through line, especially what I do, because on stage over the years I've evolved more into a storyteller, so I can bring in elements and couch it in such a way that it has a flowing logic. So for me, the organization of material is just leading me to make it seem more like the audience is hearing a story rather than they're hearing a series of one-liners, even though I might have written, some of those jokes 18 years ago, some of those jokes 2 weeks ago, and some of those jokes earlier this afternoon.
Yeah. That's one of the things, because I mean, this is a fairly, well-used book of mine, and actually you can still see that there's a number of different bookmarks inside. One of the things that I took from you is, like, even if I have a joke that's set that isn't quite ready, it isn't buried because of a recorded performance somewhere, I can still fold it into a larger story, or I could rework it to put it elsewhere, or take a section of it out to put in another joke for a set. It's coming back and reworking material as well as expanding on material you already have.
Absolutely. And it's also a matter of taking in your life into consideration. When one of my first bits, a really early bit, was I talked about how I loved amusement parks. And I talked about it from the perspective of being a kid going to the amusement park and how excited I was. And then later on, when I'm in my mid-20s, I talk about how this is the greatest place to take a date. You know what I mean? Because you've got those dark places like the haunted house where you can make out. You have the scary places where she's got to cling onto you. And then later on in life, I'm talking about it from reminiscing, being in my 30s, looking back. And now I can talk about it, bringing my 15-year-old to it. You get the perspective of time that I think comics just forget about. They write a bit about drinking, when they're 25 and then perform it the same way, for the next 20 years. No, your drinking habits at 45 are way fucking different than they were at 25, unless you're a sociopath, so you've got to adjust your material, and it's never done. It's never finished. It's available. That's the best your material gets to be.
It's a living and breathing art. Mike Kamash is saying a great tome on the craft, a recommended source for all those wanting to improve their act, no matter what level they find themselves at the present. Mike is a comedian based here in Montreal. We do a check-in show, which I'll be doing tomorrow at noon with him, where him and a couple other people, we just check in with each other. We started that over the pandemic.
That's an awesome community.
Yeah. Now, so I know a lot of this is sort of ingrained into you, but do you make sure that you set aside time each day to work on the craft?
Yeah. I have to, at this point in my life, I've got a kid, I've got household responsibilities. I'm still touring constantly, well, I had a year and a half off, but now back to touring constantly. And in addition, I've graduated onto making movies and making TV shows. So I've got a full scale production company that I'm running.
For those that are wondering, the background is from the production studio. That's where we're talking to Jim Mendrinos from.
Yeah. So my days start at 6 or 7 in the morning, and they probably don't end till midnight, 1 in the morning on most days. And I need to make sure I carve out a chunk of time to write. And I know people think it's insane, but there are 2 things that really influenced me to do this. Number one was working with Sam Kennison, who at one point turned to me and said, "You don't give a shit about anything you're talking about." I was all 20 years old when he said it to me, but it just made me kind of examine oh, yeah, I really should talk about things that matter to me. So that was the first eye-opening thing. And then the second one was doing a week with Bill Hicks, where we worked at Charlie Goodnight's in Raleigh, North Carolina, who, if there are any comics out there, that was one of the marquee rooms of the 80s. That was just a great place to work. And we worked together, and we got up, we had cereal together, we watched cartoons, we did our show. And then at night, when I was sitting there reading a book or getting ready to go to bed, that motherfucker was sitting down and writing every night. And that made an impression on me at 22 or 23. And since that week, I've written every day, and I've not missed a day. The day my mom died, I wrote. The day my sister died, I wrote. I got married, I wrote on my wedding day. I got divorced, I wrote on the day it was finalized. It's one of those things that now is difficult for me not to do. And here's how ingrained it gets in you. In about 7 years ago, I got into a horrible train accident and a massive concussion, to the point where I forgot how to read and write. I had to relearn what the letters looked like. I had to relearn all of that. I couldn't shut it off. At night, I was literally talking into a tape recorder and saying bits into a tape recorder because I didn't physically know how to type anymore. And I'll be totally honest. That happened when I was 50. I don't know that I would have had the desire to relearn all that had it not been for the fact that I just felt so artistically impotent because I couldn't write it down. And the doctors were there like, it should have taken you a lot more than 4 months to relearn this. And they're like, nope, I got shit to do. There
was a young comic actually who I recommended this book to, based out of Halifax, who he ended up he was at, I don't know if you know the band NoFX. He had a university sports scholarship. He was at which university was it? He was at an American university on a sports scholarship. And he went to a NoFX concert. He left the concert and he saw 4 white guys jump a black guy, and he stepped in. And he ended up being in a coma for 3 months. He had a bruise on the back of his brain.
Yep.
And he had to relearn how to talk. He was paralyzed on the left side of his body. And this was a competitive swimmer. Wow. For him relearning how to talk, and relearning all that, and then getting into stand-up comedy with his stories. But he also had a childlike innocence, which came from the brain injury as well, which was great. And I do believe that book helped him, and I believe that your book helped him, is what I mean. And that finding his voice, and to find out that you have a similar story due to the concussion you had from the train accident is.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people going through some serious stuff. I mean, it's, I hope my book helped him. I hope it really, pointed him somewhere that was useful for him. But brain injuries, and I've been doing some work with some brain injury foundations to try and raise some money. They're massively difficult to, even measure, because somebody who's my age, 50, I'm going to be 57 in a few weeks. We were of the generation walk it off. You know what I mean? You get hit in the head with something, you're a little dizzy. Everyone's saying you're fine, walk it off. When I went to the doctor, they're like, you never had a concussion? They're like, no. He goes, there's no way your brain could be this injured if you never had a concussion before. Yeah. So I mean, there's that difficulty of it. Plus, with men, it's even more difficult because men don't ask for help.
Yep.
Yeah. So
it's a force of culture. Now, you mentioned, because of the brain injury, you were talking into a tape recorder to get the jokes out, to get those thoughts that you created that day. Now, I imagine when you started, you were paper or pen and pencil, or paper and pencil, paper and pen.
Still am.
Still am. That's your primary. Again, yeah. I think that comes down to muscle memory. That's like how a lot of people start. Like, I find a lot of younger comics are on their phone, and they'll type their notes into the phone, and they use that as the tool, because that's the tool that they
grew up on.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, and it's always been this way. Black marble notebooks. Do you remember those when you were a kid?
Black marble?
Yeah.
I don't know if we had that brand. Oh, these. Those. Yeah. The composition books.
You call them black marble notebooks here.
I bought a box of these at one time.
Yeah.
So they were in the dollar store here.
I've got about 1,000 of these that are filled that just sit in a box in my bedroom that my lady is threatening me with death if I don't do something with them. She's like, scan them and throw them away. And they're like, no.
Did you not see like the special of Seinfeld? Like,
you got to hold on to all the notebooks. And before the notebooks, it was index cards. When I very first started, because I've morphed into a storyteller, but I started as a one-liner comic. One of my first writing gigs was writing for Dangerfield, because I had a penchant for writing just crisp one-liners. So I would just have them all on, a thumbtack board and just rearrange them. And it was easy to see the flow of the act that way.
Right. Huh. So, but you're still pen and paper to this day. for the most part. It's which I think would probably make it easier when you're going for a televised set, because you just have to type it out.
Yeah.
When you're submitting to Standards and Practices, those wonderful people.
Yeah. Although
yeah.
Lately, and this will make the younger comics feel good. I've been talking with a couple of people about doing a late night show, and they had to record the set at a club and send them the set, not even type it out. And they're like, really? Because you're absolutely correct. Like 10 years ago, when I was trying to get on late night shows, they're like, type it out. And now it's just, we need to hear it. So it's getting easier.
There's a lot more nuance. Mike Kamash is speaking again, saying, not that I'm saying, Mike, shut up. No, but Mike, keep speaking. I think that most people get into stand-up because they love comedy and making live audience laugh at their performance. I cannot imagine doing stand-up and not loving being on stage performing. I realize that all work has its ups and downs, and we are not always in the best mood to perform. But once you grab that mic, it is on. And if it isn't on, you have to make sure it's Well, Bill Hicks again. Let me plaster on this smile
and get through the shit one more time.
Yeah.
I somewhat disagree, respectfully, in that you can absolutely love performing stand up, but not love being on stage. I've always suffered from stage fright, even back when I was an actor. A long introduction for me is the worst thing in the world. If the MC takes I had an MC one time list every credit I've ever done, and I'm there like, I will pay you money just to say my fucking name at this point, because the nerves can get you. I lose myself on stage, and it's great. And when that wall of laughter comes rushing up, nothing feels that good. Trust me, I was a comic in the 80s. I've done every drug multiple times just to make sure they work. But that wave of laughter feels so much better. But the anticipation, there's a good amount of performers that have existential dread until the point they get on that stage.
I know. I agree. There's sometimes there's an audience that it's a bit more of a fight and it feels like work. But that nervous energy I have beforehand sort of just blooms into something when I step on stage.
Yeah.
Which I truly enjoy.
I think there's a group of comics that love the reaction from the audience. And then there's the group of comics, and I fall into this category, that love the process of crafting. For me, it's more about, I got you to laugh at that, more than, oh my God, they're laughing. It's the same result, but it's pride on almost 180-degree difference of what you're proud about.
Yeah, I when I'm watching a comedian, I can see a comedian who's like has more of a strength as a performer compared to those who have more of a strength as a writer. I like to consider myself more of a writer than a performer, but at the same time, I feel like I need that audience energy. What would be your thought towards? Because the Zoom shows were I think really could showcase those who are writers.
Yeah, I will admit, the reaction I was getting from Zoom, at times I was there like, I'm not quite this good, but thank you. Just because it does showcase the words, it does showcase the material, and I had the ability to fill the Zoom box with a whole lot of material. I think that's an advantage as opposed to comics that we're doing personality bits or timing bits. And there's nothing wrong with bits that are personality driven or timing driven. But, in this box, joke driven works better. And so it definitely showcases your ability as a writer, or it showcases your ability to write a very specific brand of humor. And with that said, as somebody one time said, I think the person who's never getting a corporate Zoom gig is Gallagher, which actually is one of the funnier lines I ever heard. And all of this to say that I think there are strengths being a writer, and there are strengths with being a performer. But if you are a great comedian, then what you understand is that your job as a writer is to write the act that you, the performer, can perform best. And
Yes.
you're almost your act is a well-worn suit for your performance, which is one of the reasons why I eventually morphed out of one-liners and into stories, because that speed, that energy, I just don't have the ability to sustain that for an hour to an hour and a half. But there's a musicality to my performance, and I know how to craft it in such a way that it almost has a jazz composition where there's a structure and movements and, high points and low points. And that served me better. But it was a matter of learning the craft, then learning what I do, and then going, oh, I should do it this way, and then, I wish it didn't take 37 years, but,
Well, for anyone who needs a shortcut, there is this book that kind of outlines a lot of it. It's also, I think there's like a Venn diagram for the writers and performers and the people who hit that sweet spot right in the center. I didn't mean to make a vagina shape on screen, but that's another sweet spot.
It might have also been an Illuminati shape. I'm not sure. It was one of those two.
Yeah, one of those two.
Either way, it's a conspiracy.
Now, one of the lessons you mentioned you learned earlier is something that you address in the book, and it's something that when I was dealing with younger comics, I used a phrase was your conversation with Sam Kinison, saying that you are not writing anything. You don't believe anything you're saying on stage, and you address that. You refer to it as the passion, having the emotion to go with it. I call it the emotive context of the joke.
Okay.
But do you want to explain?
Yeah. Okay. So new comics. I'm not even going to say young comics because you can be 70 and your first time starting. You tend to listen to other comedians and you tend to hear what they're doing to get laughs, and you do the same thing to get laughs. It's like when you see somebody the first few times they're on stage, you could go, you love this comic. You love that comic. We wear our influences, and the influences fade away in terms of performance style, because when you go up there and you're doing a Norm Macdonald impression, and you realize you can't sustain it, that goes away. But the joke structure and style will stay because that's what you learned on, that's what you loved. But the problem is, then you go into a room and you hear it, and I see it all the time. I watched a whole bunch of in New York they have bringer shows, and bringer shows get a pro comic to close the show, so that while their 200 friends are there, somebody who's been doing this for decades gets the joy of getting the checks dropped on them. So I tend to close a lot of those shows around the city, and in particular places like Gotham and Broadway. And I'll be on it and I'll watch comics go up, and it's like, okay, what's in vogue this week? Oh, comic books. Oh, Marvel movies. Oh, we're talking about Viagra now. We're talking, and you see like 7 comics all doing bits on those same things, and you could tell they don't care. You could tell they just like, so-and-so had a Viagra joke and he got good laughs, so I'm going to have it. And I harken back into the 80s when every good touring comic had at least a few minutes on airplane food. You had just, a few minutes on road signs because you had to, and we just, these are what works. Mention the town you're in, shit on it for 30 seconds, and then move on, and it's that cookie cutter. I know this works because of the zeitgeist of being in the rooms. And if you're not careful, you tend to structure all of your act like that. Like, I know the audience laughs at this, so I'll talk about it. I know the audience laughs at this, so I'll talk about this. And it cuts you out of things. All right. When I started, I was 19 years old. I'm a 19-year-old kid who, I adored punk rock. I hung out in CBGBs, but I also adored jazz. And I was equally as likely to hang out at the Blue Note. I could talk to you about Joey Ramone all day. I could also talk to you about Miles Davis or John Coltrane all day. And as the 19-year-old kid, I only talked about Joey Ramone. I didn't talk about, John Coltrane, because comics my age weren't doing that. Whereas I realize now would have been vastly more interesting to talk about all of it. And
Yeah.
that's what you have to do. You have to bring the depth and breadth of your humanity into your performance, and you do that by crafting the material. That's all about it. You know, right now, the set I did last night, I did 5 minutes about people who contacted me during the pandemic. You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, the girl that got away. You know, right down to the first girl I ever kissed when I was 6 years old, because during the pandemic, everyone came out of the woodwork. You know, and I talked about that on stage because that's what was on my mind. That's what I was interested in talking about, and that set me apart. There were four other comics talking about OnlyFans. Okay, nothing wrong with OnlyFans, but I don't care about OnlyFans. I care about the people that were trying to contact me during the pandemic. You know, so that's what I mean. If you really go, this is an art form, and by definition, art should be selfish, and I mean that by all the good context of that word, for the artist, by the artist, in the way the artist deems necessary. And if you view stand up that way, you'll always talk about stuff you love. The second you view it as, I need to make the audience laugh, then you're sunk.
Yeah.
You should just have enough confidence in yourself that I know if I talk about jazz, I know if I talk about, the one that got away, or if I talk about pre-Carneckian metaphysics, I'm going to make you laugh. It doesn't matter what I'm going to talk about. I will find a way to make you laugh. But I'm going to talk about the things that I'm passionate about at that moment.
So that's the thing is I find like people may not always understand the subject matter you're talking about, but they can always understand the emotion that you have towards it, and it's why I took the idea from your book, but I coined the phrase the emotive context.
Yep.
When describing it to people.
Well, people don't understand. Nobody's ever laughed at a thing. People laugh at the underlying emotion that you're talking about. Richard Pryor did a bit on Live at the Sunset Strip about having a $500 a day freebase habit, setting himself on fire, third degrees over 80% of his body, and then having to tell James Brown that he was an addict. And no other human being has that experience. None. Nobody. That's it. It's only him. But, we all understand addiction, we all understand pain, and we all understand shame. And that's what we reacted to. It's why you as a guy can laugh at, a joke about childbirth, and a woman can laugh about, getting kicked in the nuts. We can understand the underlying emotion, the underlying impetus for the reason to talk about it. And comics are too concerned about talking about a thing. You're going to talk about a computer mouse? No one's ever going to laugh at it. You're going to talk about the frustration of not knowing how to use the latest mouse? Everyone understands that. It's not a thing. It's an emotion. You've never thought about something, then laughed at it. Honestly laughed at it. Okay? It's never been somebody said something and then belly laughed. If you consider it, the best you're going to do is like, yeah, that's funny. And if we as comics got that laugh, we would be suicidal. Because, that's not what we don't want, that academic, intellectualized laugh. We want that visceral, gut reaction, snot coming out of the audience's nose because they cannot control themselves kind of laugh. It's what makes comedy specific. It's why somebody can watch a Jerry Seinfeld and laugh doubled over, and somebody else can watch him and not be a fan. It's why I can sit here and go, I absolutely adored watching Kennison. I wasn't very interested in what Dice had to say. It's what you react to and how you react to it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's having that emotional connection with the performer and watching them. There's something that you mentioned in your explanation that kind of also hit me as a Canadian, because I've traveled a good bit of Canada doing comedy, in the fact that these different clubs on a different night, all the comedians have these jokes on a certain subject matter because that's what's in vogue. One of the things I've discussed with other comics in Canada is because we don't have the population density of the United States, when you're on tour or when you're traveling doing comedy, it seems like every city has its own flavor. Like every city has its own, like, say a Montreal famous or a Toronto famous comic who's there, and that's the comic that all the newer comics are trying to emulate.
Yeah.
Part of that is also too because that comic is the person that's sort of been educating the comedy audience
Yeah.
a lot of times. So the people coming out, so that's what they learn to laugh at. So if you're trying something different, then it it can make the audience sort of pause a little bit before they can get into the laughing. I mean, getting that universal quality you can hit everywhere, but if you're only playing in one city, you've sort of developed a style of that city.
Yeah. And what people forget is that there have literally been tens of thousands, if not millions, of comedians before us.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority have drifted into obscurity, and not just because there was no YouTube, but I mean, we all know the name Will Rogers. Can you name 5 of his contemporaries? You can't, because he was the innovator and they were the imitators. There are certain people that we will always remember as innovators. I mentioned Ronnie Shakes earlier. Nobody made me laugh harder than Ronnie Shakes, yet he's lost to time. He's never going to be remembered. Not that he wasn't brilliant. He was. He was an absolute monster. And if you were in a club, you wouldn't want to follow him. But what he wasn't one of those people that you looked at and you went, this is new. This feels a little different. And, it's that Carlin vibe, that Steve Martin vibe, that vibe of, I haven't seen this before and I'm probably not going to see it again. And that's, I think a lot of comics don't appreciate that innovation is important. And yes, we've lost a lot of innovators to time too. I defied 10 comics to tell me who Lord Buckley is, even though half of us are doing his bits after all these years. But, he transcended the language and he made it so that we're writing our own material long before, Lenny Bruce started writing his own material. Lenny Bruce made it conversational, but he didn't take chances till long after Mort Saul did. But you remember Lenny more than Mort, so you remember the innovators. Some innovation has more merit than others, but the innovators are what's important.
Mike Mash is saying what you're describing, Paul, is what I call auto-tune stand-up. I think that might be a little bit harsher than what I was meaning, but yeah, it's...
Well, it's like every time I've worked with American comics in Canada, hey, it's 8:30 with the exchange rate. That means it's only 7:15. I mean, or some variant of that joke every time I've worked with them. And I'm there like, you think this audience hasn't seen that before? You think you're the first person to say that to this audience?
Yeah. One of the things as a Canadian that, and especially as a Canadian comedian, is seeing a performer going on stage is, I was in the Walmart. Do you have those here? Like,
yeah,
like these are questions you should have asked before you went on stage.
Yeah,
unless you got crowd work questions specifically about that, or are making a joke about that, saying it. Yeah, I was breathing oxygen. You have that here, right?
Yeah, or making fun of your own ignorance, which is, I've watched comics go up there and do that wonderfully. Play the ugly American character when they're. I worked with a comic in London who did that. So Paul Provenza, who talked about having no idea of where he was because he studied geography in the U.S. So how close are we to Tokyo? I mean, those kind of jokes. But you've got it. It's got to be your aim.
Paul Provenza is so smart. I worked for a time for the festival Just for Laughs, and one of the jobs I had was organizing the submissions library and then also updating the database of old clips, old performances that they had taped, and then by subject matter doing a spreadsheet of the material and going on and watching, an 80s era Paul Provenza doing AIDS jokes when no one else could have touched it. Brilliant, very intelligent. And I mean, what he does with the green room as well.
Yeah.
Now, this is a question because you are so great at being organized with your writing. Are you using spreadsheets as well? I mean, you've got you talk about organizing your premises, so you have that. Are you using, how computerized are you?
When I go into the computer, I go in Microsoft Word, and what I found works for my brain better than spreadsheets. Because here at the studios run off of spreadsheets, and my partners can tell you I'm not allowed to update them. I literally have to hand somebody everything because I will fuck up a spreadsheet just by opening it. I think at this point they're about to ban me from opening them. So what works better for my brain is on Microsoft Word, there's a table of contents function. So what I do, and it lets you have up to 4 subtables. So chapter 1 could be New York City, and then subchapters, the boroughs, and then a subchapter of that subchapter, Brooklyn. Then a subchapter of that subchapter could be a specific neighborhood. So I found that works better for my brain, and all of the chapter titles and all of the subchapters are actually my keywords. I don't know if you work off of keywords to memorize your jokes, but they're all keywords. So I can walk around and my table of contents now is about 300 pages. I could literally walk around with that instead of walking around with the 5,000 page book of material, and just do it that way.
Fantastic. There's I just took a look at the time. We've been just talking about the writing and your road experiences and all that. But a part of this show is also talking about what has happened in the past year. You have mentioned about the fact that you've done the Zoom shows, and your experiences have been generally positive because as a writer you get a chance to it showcases the crafting.
Yeah. We did a lot during Zoom during the pandemic for a couple of reasons. I started doing Zoom shows more for new comics, literally in March, right after the pandemic started, because I'd always been teaching comedy at Gotham Comedy Club, so I knew a lot of the newer comics, and I was getting these emails saying, "Oh my God, just as I found the thing I love, they've closed down everything and it's never coming back." And the woe is me thing that happens. And if you've been around as long as I have, you realize it's cyclical. There was the AIDS epidemic and nobody wanted to go to a club because they didn't know how AIDS was transmitted, and you might get it from a drink. And then clubs came back and they were perfectly fine. And then there was 9/11 and nobody wanted to go to a comedy club in New York because you never know where the terrorists are going to attack. It's a large group of people, and they came back perfectly fine. It was just a matter of we had to ride out, this pandemic. But I understood that, having lived 37 years in the industry, the youngins didn't. So I would organize these newer shows. Like, we're just going to get stage time. Just invite your friends and we'll do this by stage time. And we were doing a lot of those. And then the summer rolled around in the city, and I started getting these phone calls like, "Hey, I've got a barbecue in Brooklyn. Do you want to come and do 10 minutes in the backyard?" And I'm there like, there's still a pandemic and there's no vaccine, so I'm going to pass. And but other veteran comics weren't. And we lost a comic named Kenny Ortega to COVID because he did an illegal house party, and he caught it and passed away. And from that point, I called Al Martin, who's with the Broadway Comedy Club, and me and my business partner John here in the studio started Comedy Therapy, which was online Zoom shows. We're just 7 nights a week, like a traditional comedy club. We are having our shows, and we ran that we started it on Christmas Eve, and we ran it straight through till the end of April. Every night. We do about 1 show a week at this point now, just to kind of keep the virtual shows going, just in case there's another spike. We all have to go back up underground. But, and we, comics like Rich Scheidner and, Brian Scott McFadden and Kathy Ladman and, Felicia Michaels, Carol Montgomery. I mean, we had all-star shows that we were doing online, and they were great. And we managed to keep so many comics safe during the pandemic and keep so many audiences happy during the pandemic. And that was fun. And we did it as like this giant, almost communist socialist thing. Like, if we make $1, we're sharing it, and everyone's going to get a piece of this. And we did. And I'd like to think it helped. I'd like to think it kept some of us on our feet through the pandemic, and helped in as small a way as it could. But, the shows were fun. And for me, it was really, there was one night where it was me, Felicia, Greg Rogel, J.R. Havlin from The Tonight Show, Rich Scheidner, and we're all on the same show. And I'm like, this is a murderer's row. This is as good a show as anybody's ever going to see. And that was fun.
Wow. That's, yeah. There's actually, there has been one comedy club that has opened up in Canada, but they're bringing in international acts via that is, it's called the Underground Comedy, and he's actually built a virtual comedy club. He appears as an animated figure while he's hosting it, and the camera moves around to the point that you actually can see the Zoom screen within the venue from different angles.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's Rodney Ramsey. It's the Unknown Comedy Club. Sorry, that's what it's called.
Unknown Comedy Club. Okay.
Yeah. There's I actually did a festival this year, just as things were beginning to open up out west in Canada. They had less restrictions, so they did hybrid shows for the festival, where they'd have a screen on stage, and about a little less than half the acts were acts like me who were zooming in to do the show. And I've talked to a couple producers who are saying that they're going to kind of keep that format for some shows, just to make it easier to add like an international flavor or something to their show by doing that. And it scored me a in-person spot for next year on the festival.
That's awesome. Yeah. And we're coming back in the States pretty quickly. And there's a whole lot of live shows. We just did a live festival 4 nights in New Jersey, the Turnpike Comedy Festival, which was incredibly fun, and just seeing all those faces in a room. But everything has to be done with safety first.
Yes.
It was our whole thing with starting comedy therapy and starting these online shows. Let's keep everyone safe. So we need to keep everyone safe.
I'm seeing you active in Displaced Comedians as well.
Yeah.
Do you think that even after, once things become safe, once we have 80-90% of the people are vaccinated, do you think that there's still going to be a place for these like Zoom shows?
I think Zoom open mics are never going to go away, just simply because it's much more convenient and comics can control their stage time. So yeah, I think those will stay around. Corporate shows, I think Zoom will be the wave of the future. Absolutely be the wave of the future for, it used to be when I would do a corporate gig, I'd have to fly to, Tennessee or Dallas to do it. And now I can just basically put up a nicer backdrop and do it here. So I think those will stay. And classes, I think the class structure. I can't tell you how many comedy classes I've taught online, since the pandemic started. Which was, I didn't think there'd be a market for that, but apparently there's a huge market for that. With all that said, do I think live shows will be replaced? No. I think there'll be hybrids. I think there'll be nights where it'll happen. I think during winters, you're going to see a lot more Zoom shows than you will in spring, summer, and fall, which is logical. But I don't think they're going to be anything more than just another lesser avenue, if that makes sense. I don't think they'll ever go away entirely, but I don't think they'll ever reach the popularity they did, say, in January of this year, February of this year.
Now, something that's very popular in the UK that I've noticed with the pandemic is the panel show. The panel show has sort of gained a lot of popularity with a lot of like theme type of shows. Have you participated in any of those?
I've done a few of them over the past year. I've done a couple out of Australia, which were incredibly fun. I do gotta say the Australian comics are insane, which is just nice. And
Growing up in a country that will kill you.
Yeah, everything in that country can kill you, including the flight to get down there. Um, so they've been fun. They have not caught on here in the States. In the States, we still like our four comics and a brick wall more than anything else on the planet here, and I don't understand why. It's the most boring thing in the world, but okay.
Well, I mean, a Tough Crowd, which you have been on,
Yes,
was effectively a panel
panel
show.
show. And it was wildly unpopular here in the States. The only people that watched Tough Crowd were comics. I never had a real audience member go, "You were great on Tough Crowd." I've had every comic I've ever met go, "I saw you on Tough Crowd. You were on with Patrice," and I'm there like, "Yes, I was."
And you got a couple words in too, which is around Patrice.
It's funny for me because Patrice and I would always lock up. Patrice, he was loudmouth. I was a loudmouth. Still am a loudmouth. And so we would lock up. And when I got on the show with him, everyone was like, "Patrice is going to bully you." And Patrice was the biggest sweetheart. He's there like, "Okay, here's if you need me to shut up, just give me the high side." And they're like, "You don't do this for other people, do you?" But Patrice is also the person who told me at a roast I should never be on a roast because I'm too mean.
Ooh.
Yeah. So
I mean, like Patrice was a bully on stage, but he had so much heart.
Yes.
Right. A big part of his emotive context was the love that he felt for the subjects he was complaining about. That's why he was complaining about them.
But I will say, and not talking ill of the dead, if Patrice did not like you, you knew it. There was no coming back from it. For whatever reason, he was okay with me. But I know 40 comics that, when he died were like, good, just because he had burned that many bridges. The beauty of Patrice is that artistically, he just did not give a fuck. He did what he did and wanted to.
Yeah.
I love the comment, Mike, by the way. That's a good comment.
I was just going to read it out loud just in case I do an audio version of the stream. Mike Mash is saying, "There's no replacing a live audience for a performer. Even Zooms with a live streaming are lacking in the intimacy of a club setting."
And that's a great comment, but it's not as lacking of it. It's a different kind of intimacy that I think, comics just didn't embrace because it's not that reciprocal energy. When you're performing in a Zoom show, you've got to be very self-contained with your performance. It's almost more akin to what somebody like an Eric Bogosian would do, in that I'm just going to fold into my content and assume the audience is following. Whereas comics, we're trained to check in.
Yeah.
How you guys doing? Yeah, having a good time tonight? I mean, all those check-in words that don't exist in the theater world,
Yeah, that's like a one-person play versus a stand-up routine.
Yeah.
For some reason my brain was blanking. I didn't put out the ask the questions in chat to join us in. I don't know how much time you have, Jim.
I got a little while longer for you.
Okay. The worldsbestcomic.com is Jim's website. I just want to definitely mention that. And also Medrinos _in_exile on Instagram. That's a way to keep in touch with Jim's social media. And all of it is linked also to his website, which is World's Best Comic. I also want to pay attention also to everything that has happened in the past, like 14 months. Your country has gone through a lot. The world has gone through a lot. Like the pandemic has been worldwide, and there has been lockdowns around the world, except Texas. Sorry,
and Florida.
Just the New York Times article about the doctor who's made millions.
Yeah.
And who himself is vaccinated, but has been making other people question vaccinations.
Yeah.
There is how has that made you feel, like, not only about your society, not necessarily about your country, but everything that has come through?
Wow. I have a very pessimistic worldview. And I had an ex one time say that I could complain about the penmanship on $1 million check. That kind of is my personality. And I believe most people suck until you prove to me that you don't. That's, now what that does is that makes me strive very hard to not suck. It makes me strive very hard to be the best human being I can. I'd like to think that I'm very successful at it, but I'm sure that there's some people that would tell you, no, he's the villain in this story, just because that's the way that life is. But what I've seen in the past 14 months, I've seen both the best and the worst of humanity just bubbling up. I've literally seen people grabbing, food donations and bringing them to elderly and infirm people, not because anyone asked them to, but because they knew they should. I've also seen jackasses with bullhorns bullying people with masks as they were going into a Stop and Shop to get groceries because they weren't afraid enough. You needed somebody from the Proud Boys to bully them. So I've seen both ends, and I'd like to say that one end is dominant, but it's not. There, for every jackass, there's a decent person, and for every decent person, there appears to be a jackass. I believe in mass extermination of all jackasses. That's just my personal philosophy. The guy with the bullhorn should have the bullhorn rammed up his ass. Again, that's because I know people will say, well, it's dissenting viewpoint. If you're spreading anti-vax bullshit and you're causing one person to delay getting the vaccine and that person contracts the disease and dies, you killed that person. And I view it as that direct. And so, the ex-president, a lot of so much of the media just perpetuated and fear-mongered. And in the U.S. right now, we're that close to a race war. We're perilously close to a race war as well. And not because it has to happen, but because there are some people that want it to happen. So I would love to say I have hope, but I don't have a lot of it. And the woman I'm with and the daughter I have is biracial. So, it's and the town I live in New Jersey, which is Fair Lawn, New Jersey, is the Proud Boys capital of New Jersey. And it's where their headquarters is. So it feels like a fight. And so I try and use as much comedy as I can to kind of put a release valve over the anger, but to say I'm not angry and to say that this hasn't made me feel bad, it has. I've seen people getting plunged into abject poverty and then have to take illegal house parties and risk their lives in order to pay the rent, instead of being given a break. And that's the kind of stuff that just kind of upsets me. And I know this is like a down note and we're supposed to be talking comedy, but for me, seeing what happened in the past 14 months, it makes me want to protect my child more than anybody can ever possibly imagine. And it also makes me want to sit down and go, look, you're not getting any breaks. This is what the world is. Let's build you some armor.
I believe comedy should be used for positive social change. Yeah. Whenever possible. I mean, through laughter. Mike Amash put this comment in earlier saying you can't be everything to everyone.
No.
I do like that. I believe, because the Black Lives Matter movement is not just a U.S. thing, and in Canada we have a lot to address as well, especially with our treatment of natives. People. Yeah. The information coming out about the residential schools that we all sort of subconsciously knew and didn't want to really address is now very much in our faces. There is the chance with, I'm about to call out Jeff Wayne on this kind of thing. There's a chance for comedians to influence and educate at the same time as entertain. And I kind of want all of that to happen. Out of you.
I also got to say, it also has to be within that comic's desires and abilities. You know, George Carlin could talk about social issues till the end of time, and he did, and that was wonderful. Richard Pryor didn't. Richard Pryor talked about Richard Pryor, and that was all he was ever going to talk about, and that was fine too. You know, I just, if
In a
every
way,
comic,
though,
it
he
touched on
addressed,
social issues,
yeah, he addressed his experience as a black man in America.
right? But it wasn't presented in the way Carlin did, which was to make change.
Yeah,
You know, it was presented in, this is just what happens. You know, because police police will erase a black man in America is just Pryor's viewpoint on himself and not his viewpoint on the world structure.
yeah,
All of these things to say that just because you can doesn't mean you're obligated to. You know, and Gallagher, his art is smashing watermelon. It's what he enjoys. And I'm not saying that to be flippant. I'm saying when he got into it, he said, "This is what's funny to me." Robert
yeah,
Klein is wonderful in everything he does. I've never seen a more perfect set of skills on a comedian. He wouldn't know a political punchline if it attacked him. It's just not what he does. And we have to, the obligation of art is art. And there's a small subsect of us who are going to use that to affect you know, or to try to affect a positive change. And there are some of us that are going to use it to go, isn't this pretty? Take a look. And I think there's value in both.
I also believe that even the people who aren't being political in their act in uh, being inclusive and being inclusive with the acts that they work with and being and encouraging inclusivity with the audience that they bring in have that chance to subtly affect social change.
Yeah.
I mean, the person who founded the Proud Boys has actually lived in Montreal when he did. He also founded Vice magazine, which does the Vice news stuff.
Yeah.
This is among the list of sins that Montreal is guilty for. Uh, but it's the thing is to be acting in an inclusive manner and to show people that color of skin is not really, should not really be considered to be a difference between people, because people are people and should be treated as equals.
Well, it's. I remember very early talking to my dad, and again, my dad was born in 1912. He was a merchant marine when he was 12 years old. He sailed the world before he was 18. It was a different style of man, and my dad came to the States not speaking English, off the boat, only spoke Greek. So the racism he endured was epic in the 1950s. And I remember talking to my dad when I was a little kid, and talking about what it means to be a man, because every Greek parent's going to have that conversation with his 8-year-old because they're oh so ready for it. And he so eloquently summed it up with, "Just try your best not to be a dick." Uh, and it sounds overly simplistic, but that's what it is. If you just try not to be a dick, if you're not a dick about it, chances are you're not going to do the wrong thing.
Yeah, that is the advice that so many people needed to hear growing up, to be drilled in. That I think is almost a great place to end it. We're 10 minutes longer than I normally do the show.
No problem.
But if I can ask just one further question, what
Yeah.
is your hopes for the future?
Wow.
I know, and I haven't even touched on the fact that the January 6th
Insurrection. Yeah.
insurrection investigation is happening today, being telecast today.
Yeah. And it's been fireworks. Catch your news at some point because you're going to have some fun. Look, I don't have a lot of faith that the future is going to be better. But my hope is that there can be enough incremental change that we leave the planet better than we inherited it. That the next generation has more to work with, and hopefully they have the common sense to figure this shit out, because we sure as hell didn't. Now, artistically, my hope is that everyone just commits to just making the best, most satisfying art they can. Just because I think if we learned any one thing during this pandemic, it's that human beings need to find joy wherever they can. Between the riots over the summer with Black Lives Matter, the insurrection in January, some of the craziness of the waning days of Trump, the pandemic spikes, of February and March. With all that said, the one constant was viewership on all the streaming platforms were up. People's desire for new movies was tremendous. People, wanted, how many online comedy clubs popped up during that time? People needed to laugh. All of these things became true. There was more music downloaded during the pandemic in the U.S. than in any 3-year period in the history of music. All of this to say, we need relief. We need that thing that brings us joy, and for everybody, that joy is art. Now, my brand of art that I sling is comedy, but whether it's comedy, it's music, it's photography, you write plays, if you art, just art as best you can, because of all. It amazed me that under the New York state guidelines and New Jersey state guidelines, the person who works the drive-through window at Wendy's was considered an essential worker, but the person that's making art was not. And that to me, that perception, if I could be selfish, would be the first thing I'd like to change.
There's something I should not tell you about Canada then, but I'm about to. According to, that's the wrong place. Let me put your website back up there. There is, in Canada, stand-up comedy is not considered an art form legally. Heritage Canada, which is the organization that oversees that people can apply to for art grants, specifically excludes stand-up comedy. So you can apply as a theater show, but you cannot apply as a stand-up comedian for grants. We don't get recognition for that here in Canada. And there's also a little inequity of when we try to go work in the States, where I think it's for a 3-month period, there's about a $40 fee if you want to come up to work in Canada. We need to spend about $10,000 to get an alien of extraordinary abilities visa in our passport to be able to work in the United States.
Wow.
So
yeah. Let's shit on our artists.
Well, all right. Our hope for the future, shit on our artists. That's not exactly what we're saying. My guest today has been the fantastic Jim Mendrinos. His website is worldsbestcomic.com. You can also find him at Medrinos_in_exile on Instagram. And his wonderful book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Writing Comedy. You get the bigger screen, so it probably looked better in your screen. But there we go.
There we go. Dueling books.
There it is. So please check it out. Read that as well if you want to improve your craft, or if you're interested in learning about stand-up comedy. Not just stand-up comedy, because the I didn't even touch the fact that The Complete Idiot's Guide is about it's about comedy writing. So you include sitcom writing, long form writing, and writing in various other formats.
As many disciplines as I could think of at that time.
Yeah, because you were working in many disciplines, and that's one of the great things about you. So thank you again, Jim. Here's hoping on everything getting better. Medrinos _in_exile on Instagram. I am Paul Ash. If you want to support this channel, there's a little link tree running on the bottom. So it's linktr.ee/Paul Ash. The first button says buy me a drink. That money goes into supporting this channel and keeping it running. My name is Paul Ash. I love you all. And I'm incredibly privileged to have Jim Mendrinos here. It's as curmudgeon-y as he wants to be. I don't know if he was comfortable with me saying I love you all. But,
yeah. There's much love going on.
There's much love.